all of the 33 victims have been transported. There are no survivors back there now. We still are having emergency crews, some rescue crews that are continuing to go back and forth from the crash site. We're not exactly sure what they are doing back there. We have been told by paramedics that there are bodies that are still on the aircraft and that at this point, no effort is being made to remove them. They, however, will be removed sometime before dawn. Part of the effort that is going on at this point is to identify bodies, to identify victims. In a crash of this magnitude, you've got body parts that have been scattered over a wide area. You have a lot of body parts in the aircraft itself. One paramedic told me that at this point, you really don't know where one body ends and another begins. It's just being described as an absolutely horrific scene. And so they've got a lot of work to do at this point, and we are, of course, hoping to get more of an update as the evening goes on.
The one thing we should ask people to do if you live in the West Charlotte area or if you're just trying to get over here, there's nothing really for non-professionals to see. There's no need for you to try and go over there. As we said, as you could see from the pictures, there were so many rescue people, so many media people there, so many police officers. There has been a call gone out to all the City of Charlotte Fire Department to at least call your station. They've suspended the call to come in right now, but to call your station. And of course, the one thing people can do if you're in the Charlotte area, blood. Give blood. This is a holiday weekend, of course, which makes this so much more tragic because people are on the roads. Families will be hard to find. Certainly, there's going to be an open house at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning at the Red Cross for people to go down and take blood. One of the things I did mention earlier was the possibility of a storm or maybe a microburst. I'm not a meteorologist. Let's go to Grant Ewing in the Weather Center, who can tell us maybe a little bit more about what could have possibly gone on at 6:50 p.m. just south of the airport.
Thank you, Rick. And the last report that we had from Charlotte Douglas International Airport was at 6 o'clock. They were reporting 6 miles of visibility.
Exactly right. We also understand that at least 10 people have died. You see, that is a videotape of a picture of a telephone pole that has been knocked down. Power is currently out around Wallace Neal Road. It is a chaos. It is a mess around the airport right now. Trying to get anywhere around that area is almost impossible. One of our photographers took 30 minutes to get to the station because of all the traffic. This is all videotaped earlier. We're looking at the plane crash. We understand 10 people have died at least. That number could, of course, change. We hope it does not. 26 people were injured. 14 have been taken to hospitals. 14 have been taken to Carolinas Medical Center. 12 people at Presbyterian. Now, this is daylight video. This is taped earlier. You can clearly see the DC-9 in the house. It has clipped the right side of that house. 5 people were inside. We understand, I think, from Steve Crump, who said that he understood nobody inside the house was injured, but that there were people inside the plane who were injured. We do not know what happened. It is impossible to tell and ascertain at this point. This is also video of passengers being airlifted.
Now, we know that there were people who were taken to Presbyterian Hospital. There are an update on the number there, Lisa, 7 patients at Presbyterian Hospital. And right now, we want to go to our Rita Cosby, who is on the scene. We have a number of reporters out there, including Rita. Rita, what can you tell us?
Well, Maura, I was just told a few moments ago that a team from Washington, D.C. is indeed on the scene. They are investigating this crash. The NTSB is expected to get here about 11:30 to midnight. Usually the procedure is a few hours after they get here, there will be a news conference, so we should hopefully have some more information. Those indeed are the folks who investigate this crash, so we should have some more information on that. I just ran into Ron Bass a few moments ago. You're with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg school system. Yes. You were one of the first people on the scene. Can you tell me what you saw?
2 to 3 minutes after the plane crashed, we arrived on the scene, another fellow and I, and we saw a person in the weeds that was burning from the waist down. He finally got himself out, and we went over to him and rolled him over. The fire would not go out, and some kind of fuel was on his trousers. He was a military-type individual with a camouflaged uniform on, probably 24, 25 years old. We finally got the fire out after his lower trousers had burned away. He was bleeding profusely from the neck area, and partly skin on the right side of his face was burned away.
But that person did indeed survive.
We heard he had 80% burns and was transported.
What did the wreckage look like when you first came up, and what did you hear?
The landing gear was in the middle of the street. The main part, captain's cabin, would be to my right, which is towards the airport. The cabin part was across the street, adjacent to a dwelling that we understand that 2 people were transported that lived there. It was back in the wooded area. I did not see anyone else other than this one person.
Have you ever seen anything like this before?
This is utter chaos. I appreciate EMTs and what they do, but I couldn't be one. It's a traumatic experience, and at this time, it's just mind-boggling as to what these people have to go through out here to extricate these people from this plane.
Thank you very much. You did a tremendous job. Our hats off to you. You certainly may have saved someone's life. Well, there are a lot of stories of heroism out here tonight, like that of Ron Bass. Spoke with the man a few moments ago, and he was telling me how he extricated somebody out in the back. We were told a few moments ago, I just spoke with a firefighter who was down at the scene, and he told me that there are still several people on board. However, we are getting some ominous signs. The helicopters have not come in the past few minutes. We were told that there may only be one other person still alive in that tail section of the plane. Apparently, there may be at least 6 people in there, but there may only be one survivor. Also, Jerry Orr, who is the airport director, is going to be doing a live press conference with some new information that should be happening just in the next few minutes, and we'll hope to bring you that live. Back to you in the studio.
Okay, thank you very much, Rita. Now, we have been speculating that the weather may have had something to do.
Have a look on their face as if they have seen something very horrible.
We heard from some of those people earlier tonight. In fact, some of our interviews were being used nationwide. I had a call when I was still at home from a family member who said, have you seen that? It's just that incredible, the descriptions that were coming out of Charlotte tonight as people first learned about this air accident. I've just been handed a note that tells us that for you of us who are watching in South Carolina, who may have family in Columbia, who may know someone who was on that plane, the Columbia Metro Airport has now set up a briefing for family members of survivors. So if you're living halfway between the 2 cities and think you may have known someone on board the plane, or hopefully know someone who walked away from this accident, there is a briefing going on at Columbia Metro Airport, about 95 miles south of us. And we are, of course, efforting to talk with our sister station there, WIS in Columbia. They hope to have something from that end soon. The plane apparently originated in possibly Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Somewhere in South Florida was the origination point of that airplane before it touched down in Columbia, before it touched down with such horrific results here in the city of Charlotte. To recap, for those of you who may have just joined us for some reason, it was about 6:50 this afternoon when a plane coming into Charlotte Douglas during some type of a storm did go down. We're hearing 10 dead, possibly 15 dead. Joining us now via the telephone is Rob Brisley from the Charlotte Fire Department. Rob, good talking to you again, buddy. Hate it's under these circumstances. What can you tell us more that we don't know about the rescue efforts?
Well, Rick, at this time, a quick recap. At 6:46, the call was received about a downed airplane. First responding units from Airport Crash, Fire, and Rescue arrived at 6:50, met with heavy smoke and flames, and made a quick fire suppression with foam and attack lines to facilitate rescue of possible survivors. As far as an update, I'm looking at approximately 34 victims or casualties that have been treated at area hospitals. It's been reported to me. And our crews are still trying to secure the area and make the area safe with regards to a long investigation.
Okay, it's Rob Brisley from the Fire Department. Rob, if you're still there, we had heard reports about people running out of the airplane actually still on fire. I heard some wonderful stories about people who are heroes and female heroes who were jumping in there trying to help out. Certainly, have you heard some of that? Were they able to possibly save lives even before your folks were able to get there?
Well, it's hard to say, Rick, but I know our first arriving firefighters were overwhelmed with heavy smoke and fire. And yes, there was survivors that were available to be rescued immediately, and there even had to be some interior rescue attempts inside the plane.
Okay, I know you have a lot of work ahead of you tonight. We'll probably touch base with you later on in this evening. One of the things that is coming up also is a briefing that we've been promising you for better than an hour now. Apparently, it's going to be from Jerry Orr with the Airport Authority. Of course, he runs Charlotte Douglas International Airport. We'll be touching base with him very briefly. He had told us earlier there were 10 people dead, confirmed dead after this accident. We had heard numbers that ranged as high as 15, possibly 16. Hopefully, when we talk to him in just a few minutes, we will know more about that. We'll take you to that news conference live as it happens. You can see see tape here taken about an hour and a half to 90 minutes ago. People who were on board that airplane arriving at Carolinas Medical Center. We're understanding some of the burns were just purely incredible. People with the skin literally burned off of them. They had to set up triage there in the area. They life lifted some of the people to the hospital from the CMC's choppers. We understand that both Mercy and Presbyterian hospitals also have people. We're told a total of 34 have been transported. We can't give you a breakdown on how many to which hospital. Again, if you are a family member, please give those hospitals a call. They do have more specific numbers than we do at this time. You can see the choppers landing there. It was pretty much like ferries, in and out and in and out to the scene. If you were watching us earlier, you saw the choppers continually landing, picking up people, and heading back out. There is a scene here you will see shortly from what happened just about 2.5 hours ago, almost 3 hours ago now. That was the scene taken from a home video camera, even before the news cameras were in there. You can see heavy smoke. We are told again the DC-9 broke up. A tail of it could be resting on the roof or the carport of a home along Wallace Neal Road. We have conflicting reports whether or not people were inside that home. You can see the scorched earth there from where another section of the fuselage hit. Our reporters on the scene, Kurt Lee, Ed Gallick, Glenn Counts, have told us that the plane is broken into so many pieces it is simply unrecognizable. That is why there have been calls of a DC-9, and some people have been saying 737. The plane is smashed that badly. Obviously for safety reasons and for the fact that the rescue personnel had to get there, news crews have not been permitted too close. We've seen bits and pieces of what used to be an airplane lying along Wallace Neal Road, down around Old Dowd Road. You can see the rescue workers there. Fire department officials were called in from everywhere. You can also tell just how many people were in the area. Again, a plea from the fire department. You really have no business being there. Don't go there. So let's go to Joey Pop now, who is at the hospital. Joey, what can you tell us that's new in the last 20 minutes?
Well, Rick, we've been told this is where the briefing will take place. We're inside the auditorium here. We have not gotten word yet. Scott White is now walking in. Scott, can you tell us when this briefing is going to take place? It's going to be 10 minutes, we've been told. We have to assume that we will be told the extent of injuries. We've been given notice that 40 doctors have been called in here to Carolinas Medical Center. 14 patients are being treated, we've been told. About a dozen have been sent to Presbyterian Hospital. So a lot of activity at the emergency centers tonight. As soon as this briefing takes place, we will be joining you back, Rick.
I was told that Jerry Orr would be talking. Is he at the location where you're going to be, or do we have two separate briefings? Do you know, perchance?
This is the briefing headquarters for Carolinas Medical Center.
Okay, I'm being told now electronically that Jerry Orr will be at Wallace Neal Road, so we actually will have two briefings, so maybe we can go back to Joey later and fill him in on some of the information that's coming from both scenes. Again, it is simply a horrific accident, the first major accident at Charlotte Douglas Airport since 1974. Of course, many of you were thinking back 5-6 years ago, yes, there was a plane gone down. It was a Piedmont plane. It slid off a runway, came to rest on train tracks. That was technically not a crash. This is the first crash in nearly 20 years, just a couple of months short of 20 years at Douglas Airport. 55 people on board. 5 of them apparently were the crew of this USAir plane, Flight 1016. DC-9, we are told, although, again, there is some skepticism. It could have been another kind of plane. That's just how badly it's been torn apart. But we do believe and have been calling it for the evening a DC-9. Went down about 6:50. Those people are still being taken care of. None at the scene now. Kurt Lee has told us that they've all been taken away to the various hospitals. As you just heard Joey say, some of the people were taken from CMC over to Presbyterian. In all, the fire department says 34 transported. We're told 10 to 15 dead, which still leaves us 5 or 6 people unaccounted for. Kurt Lee, any new word from where you are at the scene?
All right, Rick, we are at the end here of the crash scene. It is blocked off by police. The only lights you see are the lights that are brought by the fire department and rescue crews. The power is off here, and it is off for at least a mile down this stretch of Wallace Neal Road. The only lights we have are provided by generators. And as we see here, of course, darkness has settled in, whereas we come up on 3 hours since this crash. Again, the latest we've had here is what you have been saying, 10 fatalities, possibly the number 15 has been mentioned, and we expect to get confirmation of the correct number any minute now from Jerry Orr. He is at the other end of this stretch of Wallace Neal Road, which is covered at this time, we're told, still by the debris from the plane as it came in and apparently hit the ground. And we're told that the people who were most injured, the largest number of passengers who were injured, were in the front section of the plane, which totally disintegrated. There are pieces, very small pieces of the plane, we're told, scattered all over the area there. The one piece
here. What if there is a list of priorities? What then is it in terms of securing the scene and making the situation a lot more stable?
Well, the scene of the crash has been secured for some time now. USAir has a team en route. They'll be here at 10 o'clock, and
FAA.
USAir.
What about the FAA?
The FAA is on the way, and they will begin their investigation. Their investigation will take probably several days. It's very thorough.
Have you gotten the black box back yet? Has anybody?
I do not know that, but I doubt that.
Jerry, in terms of recapping the numbers of dead and injured for the people at home, could you do that for us again, please?
33 people have been transported to the various hospitals. There are 16 bodies that we have recovered, and we are looking for 6 more.
What
Jerry,
about the telephone
Jerry, you say
what did the plane actually hit on the way down, and what happened on impact?
Tell us about the house.
The plane came in going from east to west, went through a wooded area several hundred feet, crossed the road, and came to rest on a house.
Did it kill? The pilot said again, as right before this happened.
The pilot was on approach to land from the north on runway 18 right. He said that he was going to go around.
Which means?
Which means that he would have aborted the landing and make a turn to the right.
Did he say why, what instrument or anything, what his reason was for going around?
We do not have that information.
Could it have been the weather?
The weather is certainly a possibility.
Jerry, what was it, lightning?
I do not know exactly what the weather was at the time. I've been out here.
Tell us again.
Did the pilot and co-pilot survive?
Yes.
Jerry. Any other injuries to the flight crew at all that we know of?
The flight crew has some injuries. Do not know the extent of them. They're all at the hospital.
What about the people in the house? Was anyone on the ground injured at all?
As best we can tell, there were no injuries to anyone on the ground. There was no one in the house.
Jerry, back to the search for this. Can you talk about the 6 bodies who are still missing? Can you tell us exactly how that search is being conducted and over how wide an area? You mentioned earlier there are 16 fatalities, 33 taken to the hospital, and 6 missing. Tell us about the missing.
Now, we expect the 6 to be in the wreckage of the fuselage, and it will take a crane to lift that most likely.
I notice you've got hazmat people here right now. What will they be doing? Is it because
I have
of the
no
fuel?
idea.
Is it because
probably?
Of the fuel? Yeah.
How long could it be? As you try to account the number of the missing, is it people who are on the plane, or is it people believed to be on the ground? I mean, do we know what area these people are missing from?
People that were passengers on the airplane.
What about where he crashed? Was there something there that could have possibly forced him to go down because of the telephone poles, or was it a safe area as any around the airport, or what?
No, he hit the trees long before he got to the telephone lines.
Jerry, how long could it be before we know exactly the cause of this crash, or at least what kind of mechanical whatever might have gone wrong, if that in fact was a factor?
We may know that as short as a few days, or it may be months.
Probably will not know anything like that tonight.
I would not think so tonight.
How did the response go? I know you had a drill out here in November for just this kind of a thing, not too far away from here. Tell me about the emergency response and how that went and how quickly or slowly you got here.
Of course, we'll have to evaluate that after we get through all this. But as best we can tell, the response was fairly good.
Jerry, you said someone walked out of this plane crash alive. Actually, walked from the wreckage, and you heard him talking, but you didn't hear exactly what he said. Have you talked to anyone who has talked to him, and what? Was it a man or a woman, or who did it appear to be? Was it a member of the flight crew? What?
It was a young man, but I have no idea.
What efforts are being utilized to find those missing people? We saw a number of lights that have been put up. Are people looking in the bushes? Are people, looking away from the scene? Are they looking in parts of the plane?
Well, we expect those people to be in part of the fuselage of the airplane.
Why would
the lights
they be there?
are on the scene. Because the part of the airplane closest to the tail.
Jerry, one of the things that we've been getting is conflicting information regarding where this flight originated from. Was it Fort Lauderdale, Florida, or Columbia, South Carolina? And what kind of a plane was it?
It is a DC-9. The plane came here from Columbia. I do not know where the flight originated.
Jerry, the last major crash here was in 1974. You said that was a DC-9 also, although it was owned by Eastern at that time. Can you tell us anything about DC-9s in terms of their crash records?
Well, it's a very flight-worthy and safe airplane.
Can you tell us again, you didn't get a...
Go ahead, Paul. Describe the nature of the injuries of most of the people that were killed and injured. Were most of them burned, or were most of them injured in other ways?
I don't really know that at this time. Most of them were impact.
Because of the holiday weekend, and this, of course, being Independence Weekend in the city as well as other emergency agencies, there's a master plan for situations such as this. Is it too early to tell how everyone responded to it? Can you give me a little assessment on that?
It appears to us that the response was good. We will, of course, review all of this days from now after we get through it all. And
Jerry, back to the question about the folks who were potentially in the fuselage. Why would they be in there again?
Because that's where they were when the plane went down.
So it wasn't like they were thrown there or anything like that?
No.
How long do you all expect to be out here? When will this be wrapped up? Will it be through the night? Or?
Through the night and probably tomorrow and maybe even tomorrow night.
How long will it be before the FAA will come out with some sort of report on this in terms of the cause? How soon could we know something?
That will most likely be months.
We won't know what the cause of the crash was?
I don't think the NTSB will do a thorough investigation, and it'll be some time before they release that, I'm sure.
How long do you think it could be till they find those remaining people?
Thank you.
Anybody's guess? Or?
May have already. We just don't know.
Thanks so much.
Okay.
That is Jerry Orr, airport manager here, briefing us on the latest information. Again, 16 people dead, he tells us, 33 injured, 6 people still missing. Perhaps they are in the fuselage or still in the wreckage. That is something that the investigators down there are still working on, and it could be a couple of days or it could be a few months or even longer before we know exactly why this plane crashed and more about it. Back to you.
Okay, thank you. Ed Gallick reporting at the scene. We understand the news conference at the hospital is going to convene almost immediately. They were simply watching television as you are and waiting on that news conference to end so we could begin the next news conference. Our Joey Pop is live at Carolinas Medical Center, where I hope that's ready to begin now. Joey?
Yes, Rick. This briefing is starting as we speak. Give us an update, Doctor.
As I was saying, we had received 14 patients, serious to critical, all of them. They have been stabilized at this point, either in the emergency department and or in the operating room. All of the patients are in the process of being transferred to the intensive care units here at Carolinas.
What are the nature of the injuries, Dr. Garvey? Burns, broken limbs? Can you get more specific?
Yes, there were many burn injuries with some inhalation injuries. There were traumatic abdominal and chest injuries, orthopedic extremity injuries in addition.
Adults, children?
Yes, to my all the patients that we treated were adults.
Could you describe, sir, the situation inside the emergency room when these people began to come and the response here as the call went out to the physicians who may not have been here but were on call?
We had notification soon after the incident occurred from ground units in the field, and were able to, once that was confirmed, initiate our disaster plan. Fortunately, we have practiced this plan recently, and I think that paid off for us. We were very well prepared. The response was very adequate. We had all the staff and supplies and equipment that we needed in the department before the first patient arrived, which was, I'm not sure exactly how far after the incident.
This also talks about the network, people from all over this area, not just this hospital. Would you expand on that, please?
Yes. Actually, the first call that I received was from Dr. Tom Blackwell, who is the medical director for the county medic system. He was en route to the scene and had a confirmation that there had been a plane down and called in to notify us that there were potential casualties to be transported to our facility.
Well, the emergency workers from Gaston County and surrounding areas have come in to bring the injured.
Yes, there were out-of-county medic units that transported the individuals, as well as we were in contact with the other emergency departments in the city of Charlotte, as well as Gaston's emergency department too. They were expecting some casualties to be transported there.
Have you talked with family members? Are they here?
I have not spoken with any family members.
Doctor, do you know, can you tell us whether most of the patients were conscious when they arrived? And if so, can anyone there tell us what they were saying about what may have happened?
Many of the patients were conscious. Many of them were severely injured and had urgent airway needs that precluded their discussing what happened.
What now? You have a lot of physicians behind us. Maybe we can find out who they are and what their involvement was here. Specialists, I assume.
Yes.
Here to treat specific sorts of injuries.
To my left are Dr. Hollenbeck, Dr. Novick, and Dr. Thomason, who are trauma surgeons who were with us in the emergency department. There were additional surgeons some of whom are still with the patients in the operating room. To my right are Gwen Ligon, Ralph Vickers, emergency department nurses who coordinated our efforts downstairs, Dr. John Marks, who is the chairman of the Department of Emergency Medicine, and Dr. Jeff Runge. Dr. Runge was one of the authors of our hospital's emergency disaster plan and functioned as the triage coordinator at the front door as each of the patients were met. Maybe you can ask if you have questions
Perhaps
for anything.
we can hear from him how that went on that end as they came in. I imagine it was confusing at the very least at the time, Dr. Runge.
A big problem with this sort of an incident is information. Fortunately, we had some information from Dr. Blackwell. There were conflicting reports about numbers of people, so we went ahead and initiated the highest level of disaster, which resulted in a more than adequate supply of staff, critical care units, anesthesiology and anesthetist teams, operating rooms that were available. Dr. Hollenbeck and Dr. Novick coordinated the surgical resources. The media obviously was there was a place for them, so there was we actually expected and were prepared to get many more patients than we did receive.
Again, what was the exact number that you treated in the emergency room, and how many have been taken to?
I believe 14 patients were received here, and Dr. Novick may be able to answer better how many actually ended up in the operating room versus the intensive care units.
We tried to establish when the patients came in the acuity of their illness, who was the most seriously hurt and who needed to go directly to the operating room or needed some sort of life-saving maneuver in the emergency room. After those things were sorted out, we ended up sending 4 patients to the recovery room, which we used as sort of a secondary ICU, patients we felt who were stable but needed further evaluation but did not need to take up the most acute resources that we had. Of those other patients, 4 of them ended up in the operating room. We had a great response from the operating room staff and from the anesthesia and from other general surgeons, and we were actually able and set up to be running 15 operating rooms. Only 4 were required at this point in time. And the rest of the patients went to the trauma intensive care unit for further evaluation and stabilization. So our goal was to assess the patients, those that needed life-saving maneuvers, take care of them in the emergency room, triage the patients that needed to go to the operating room, and then the ones which were sicker and needed further evaluation to move them out of the emergency room where we could take care of them in the trauma unit.
I understand the scene is quite graphic, the injuries that you've seen. Depict that?
Probably the most graphic injuries were several patients were very seriously burned. Several had burns about their head and face, and what we would term inhalation injuries, where their head and face and their airways would swell so they'd not be able to breathe. Those patients we tried to get intubated, put a breathing tube in them, and get them on a ventilator.
Do you have crew members?
We do have 3 crew members that I'm aware of.
Dr. Novick, it may be early, but can you tell us, are any of these injuries now life-threatening? Is it possible that some of these people might not make it?
We have 2 patients right now who are very critical, and that's all I can say right now. We have others on the list who are still critical, still being evaluated, but at least by the first evaluation should survive.
the two very critical burn victims?
One is a very extensive burn, probably 50 to 60% of the total body surface area. And the second patient appears that she may have a spinal injury and perhaps some cardiac problems as well.
Will they remain here? Will they be transported?
We probably will transfer the burn patient to Chapel Hill.
Children, adults?
All adults.
Can you tell us about the crew members? Where are they based out of?
I had no conversations with them at all in terms of where they were from. Or our main goal was to take care of their injuries and make sure that they were going to survive.
Pilot, flight attendants? You know?
We had one flight attendant who is gone to the operating room for an open fracture of her leg. And we had two, I think the pilot and co-pilot came in. They were being evaluated for orthopedic injuries. Were not among the most seriously injured, at least on the first evaluation.
What about notification of family relatives?
I can't speak at that. Perhaps the ER staff can.
It's underway. There are no family members here at the present time. Would you know, Scott, and I don't know if we can get over here and get a shot of Scott White, would you know how many of the passengers that are here and crew members were from Charlotte?
I do not know. I don't.
If any of them were, or any of them?
I don't. I honestly don't know at this point. Our first responsibility was to treat the patients, and that information I just don't have access to yet.
Scott, as far as passengers, do we know if any of them are from the Charlotte area? Or
again, Joey, I don't know where they're from.
The flight originated from Columbia.
Right.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Scott, anyone treated here, were they aboard the aircraft?
That is it from here. That is it from here, Rick. As far as the briefing, we will bring you further updates as they develop.
Okay, thank you. Joey Pop reporting live for us tonight from Carolinas Medical Center. Eleanor Morgan has been holding for us for quite some time on the phone. You are with the Red Cross, and I imagine certainly in an accident of this magnitude, blood is of the essence.
It is, and so far we have been able to meet the needs that the hospitals have requested for the accident. However, we have had a lot of people who wanted to come and donate blood, and we will be open tomorrow for that very reason.
Certainly the numbers of pints that are being needed are going to be even higher because this is a holiday weekend. Were we in a tough situation going into Friday? Certainly, usually on the holidays, we have extra pleas out for blood already.
Right. For 2 weeks now, we have been asking for people to come in and donate because our situation has been very serious lately as far as our blood supplies go. We have been very low on the blood supply. We are especially low in the type O. For type O blood, so those are the donors that we really need at this time. We have been able, again, to meet the needs that we've been requested to do so far.
You said tomorrow you'll be open at 10 o'clock. That, I imagine, is the Park Road Center in Dilworth?
Park Road, 2425 Park Road will be open from 10 until 4, and we are hoping to add extra staff so that we'll be able to handle the donors that come in.
People in additional outlying counties that may want to do what they can, are there going to be Red Cross centers, or can they go to local hospitals, anything like that set up down the line so far?
Well, the Red Cross is the place to donate blood in all of the communities in the area. So the best place to do the best thing to do would be to call your local Red Cross on Tuesday, probably, to find out where they can donate in the next few days.
Okay, thank you. Again, that is Eleanor Morgan from the Red Cross. Thank you for holding, and thank you for the information. Again, 10 to 4 tomorrow. If you're in Charlotte, that is in Dilworth. Park Road 2425 is the Red Cross Center there. We are going to show you again, if you were just joining us, the scene. Just joining us now at 10:03 Eastern Time. This is the scene just after 7 o'clock this evening. The plane went down just before 7 o'clock. You can still see the smoke there. The first rescue crews arriving. The plane totally destroyed. It broke into several pieces as it landed. We understood that a tail section was still intact and sitting on a house and carport on Wallace Neal Road. Larry Sprinkle is joining us now. Larry, these pictures...
I shot these.
You shot these. Yeah. That's what I understood.
This is the approach of the plane right here. This is a real extreme close-up. You can see right there the wheels right there. And in just a moment, this is all unedited video, of course. I think we're going to see a pan over to show you how close this was to the runway. There's a clump of trees. Watch this. You can see the crash that will be coming up here in just a second, just to pan over to the extreme right over there. And you can see this clump of trees. And then this is the runway. We can
And there's the airport.
Okay, if we can freeze that right there, you can see that's the airport. That's Douglas International Airport. And you can see how close that was, the crash site, to the runway.
We can actually see the guides there that they use, the flashing lights you're so familiar with, the tower off to the left there at about 10 o'clock on your TV screen.
And you can see the fence there beyond the road. That's about a 10-foot section of fence. And then on to the left of the screen is a clump of trees. No trees were damaged. The fence wasn't hit. And then you saw the actual impact where the wheels came down, and then the crash site, which was that clump of trees. And then beyond that was apparently the house that we've been talking about.
You were there pretty quickly. Were you able to talk to anyone? Did you see certainly people rushing by?
I got there in enough time to talk to one of the people. He was about 25 years old, said he was with the sheriff's department, very shaken up gentleman, covered in mud and soot. He said that he was there right after the crash, the impact. He ran into the crash site. He said he came upon the tail section. He heard someone in there, a man screaming. The man, he said that I can't get in there, you're okay. He saw something on fire. By that time, a fire department official had come up. It was a person. They stopped the person, put the fire out, and pulled them away from the crash site. I talked to a number of people, Rick, who were at a church near there conducting a 4th of July celebration. They said there was a big thunderstorm. We've been talking about this. Right before it, a couple of the people ran out, heard the impact. One of the people had jumped, and his car was across the street, nearer the crash site. He said that he heard what he thought was a plane right over his car. And he said he thought that the plane was going to crash his car, so he ducked. And then a few moments later, he heard the impact, which was about 500 yards from where his car was. This church is about a half mile from the crash site.
Right, I'm familiar with that. I guess a lot of people are. And certainly there's the map that shows you pretty much where the school is, where the accident is, and where Wallace Neal Road is. And Wallace Neal is what we're calling the official address of the accident, very, very near to the westernmost runway of Charlotte Douglas Airport. And Jerry Orr was saying it was coming in on 18 right, which means it was coming from south to north, or coming from north to south. Just did not get there in time. Terrible accident. We certainly have been talking to the folks in Colombia. That is where the plane originated. We're going to try and go there in just a minute. Had to be one of the most frightening things you've seen.
It sure was, and just being in that particular area at the time, noticing in some earlier video that I shot there, you can see the thunderstorm clouds moving to the north, and of course Grant Ewing talked about that, and we showed
the possibility of microbursts.
Exactly, and so there's the potential for that microburst. What happens is the sun heats the earth, the hot air rises into the atmosphere, sometimes up to 50,000 feet. It's cooled and then drops rapidly downward, and it's like a giant plunger that just pushes anything down. Even at full throttle, planes sometimes cannot get through a microburst, and they're just crush down completely.
That's certainly something NTSB will be looking at.
Exactly. That's just one theory about this.
Frightening. We're going to go now to Ed Gallick, who has been standing by for us at the scene again. Ed, what's the latest out there?
Rick, just a couple of minutes ago, I spoke with a couple of police officers and firefighters who have been down there at the scene, some of the people who were first on the scene, and a battalion chief tells me that at this point the Charlotte City Fire Department is basically demobilizing its operations here because the biggest risk of any kind of fire or other explosion is now over, and FAA is now taking over the scene. Let me tell you what that means. Basically, the Charlotte City Fire Department will keep a few people here, but they're going to send home many of the other units who were here before. FAA will now go in and ask everybody, diagram everything at the scene, where every piece of debris is, where every truck is parked, ask people exactly where they walked and so forth, so that they can begin their meticulous investigation. And what that means is that the deceased inside the plane probably will not be removed until sometime tomorrow. Basically, they cannot go into the plane and start pulling people out and perhaps destroying something which could provide a clue to the cause of this crash. There were also several hundred gallons of diesel fuel spilled here, and that's why the hazardous materials unit was here. But other than that, there really has not been any problem with that. A couple of police officers who were down there, a couple of the first people on the scene, just came back shaking their head. Never seen anything like this before, of course, never want to again. One officer said he saw a few people scrambling out of the plane, and they just came out very dazed, just as you can imagine, after something like that, didn't really get a chance to talk to them, but that is still having an impact on those officers who were first on the scene here. So again, last update from Jerry Orr was 16 dead. They were still trying to account for 6 of the bodies, although they believed those people were in the plane, and they will not be removed probably until tomorrow. Back to you.
That certainly sounds rather graphic to people who don't understand how these situations work. The idea of leaving those poor dead people in that airplane for such a long time. If you've lived in Charlotte and you aren't familiar with plane crashes, many of us who are reporters, of course, get to see this kind of thing all too often, unfortunately. And it is something that has to be done to understand why, and so maybe it won't happen again. Our Joey Pop, as you saw earlier, is at Carolinas Medical Center. Let's go back to him live right now for an update.
Rick, I have the Mayor Pro Tem, Pat McCrory, here. Richard Van Root is out of town. Is that right, Pat?
That's my understanding, yes.
You're here at the hospital. What can you tell us? What have you seen?
Well, basically, I came here after hearing the accident just to see if we could provide any assistance to the families of any of the victims or the patients. And basically, since I've been here for 2 hours, no families have arrived to my knowledge, and just trying to provide any assistance in coordination between the hospital and the staff at the airport. And from what I see, Carolina Medical Centers and also our staff at the airport is just doing an outstanding job, and our thoughts and prayers are with the family, and we're trying to also coordinate any assistance to get hotel rooms and things of this nature for any of the families that might need to come to Charlotte. So,
you were actually at the nursing station. We have not been allowed inside the hospital, the emergency area. What can you tell us what went on there?
It's very well organized. They're ready for an event like this. They've fully staffed this effort. In fact, now they've overstaffed the effort, but as they say, it's better to have too many people ready for something like this than not enough. And I think they've dismissed most of the extra nurses and doctors that have been sent here now. I think they're handling most of the cases, and I'm just real impressed with the coordination between the city of Charlotte and all the hospitals.
Thank you very much, Pat McCrory. Rick, back to you.
Thank you, Joey Pop and Pat McCrory from Carolinas Medical Center. We have certainly crews at the scene still, as you heard from both Kurt Lee and Ed Gallick. The scene is, quote, demobilized now. They're starting to do that meticulous work of going through and sifting to see what went wrong, what they can find. For those of you who maybe haven't been with us except for the last few minutes, let's recap what happened tonight. Coming into Charlotte from Columbia, from Florida, a DC-9 USAir Flight 1016 went down shy of the runway. It was attempting to approach on 18 North. You can see there the route it was attempting to take, not that big a hop actually, from Columbia to Charlotte, about 90 miles. The craft went down short, clipping poles, coming to rest partly on a house. Most of the plane was destroyed. You're seeing some of the first pictures that were taken from that area, home video that we got. Larry Sprinkle was in the area when it went down. You heard from our Tim Kinney earlier, who saw the plane go down. You can see the first police officers there. Still smoke in the area, if you notice, to the top and right of your screen where the action is coming from. The plane went down possibly because of a storm. There are 34 people transported to the hospital, 16 dead. That leaves still 5 unaccounted for, 50 passengers, 5 crew on that plane. The pilot, we're told, aborted on the way in. He told the tower he was going to do a go-around. Unfortunately, the go-around came in short. He hit the trees. The flight crew, we're told, all survived. This is a live picture of what is happening there now. At one point, virtually every rescue unit in the Carolinas area was being rushed here. Because of the size of the airplane, people did not know if it was just 50 or possibly hundreds of people on board that plane for a time. Every firefighter had been called out, most of them now dispatched back to their original units. 14 people were originally taken to CMC. We're told 12 were taken over to Presbyterian after that. 34 again in all hospitalized, all adults. They are evaluating emergency response teams right now, but they say it was a pretty good job of getting there. We've heard some wonderful stories about heroes and heroines who were able to get there before the rescue crews, actually putting people out who were on fire, rolling them in the ground, taking off their own clothes to cover the people. We heard from one witness who was quite shaken at the time. We talked about the skin literally peeling off people who were jumping out of the burning aircraft. There is a plea out for more blood. The Red Cross will be open tomorrow from 10 until 4 in Dilworth Park Road if you're in the Charlotte area. Certainly if you're outside the greater Charlotte area, you can give blood at any Red Cross, knowing that, of course, it's going to get where it's needed. The hospitals right now reporting they do have the situation under control. Because of holiday weekend, a lot of people were on standby, ready to take care of whatever might come up. Again, though, because of the holiday, there were people who were out of town. If you have family or friends that you think might have been on board that plane, there are areas being set up both at the airport here and the airport in Columbia Metro Airport. There are rooms at both areas for you to go to and call. USAir, we understand, being swamped with calls, but certainly that is one other thing that you can attempt to do if you do have someone on board that plane. Our Kurt Lee is one of the 3 reporters we've had at the scene tonight. Kurt is live right now from Wallace Neal Road.
Hey, Rick, I'm here on the southern end of the crash site, and we have seen a few more rescue units leave the area without their lights flashing. As we have heard, they are calming down this entire rescue effort. Apparently, the people who are going to be transported have been transported, and we've been told that that total is 34 people. And as we heard earlier, 14 are said to be hurt seriously. 2 are considered very critical. And as we also heard earlier, the death toll is now set at 16. There are 6 people missing, and we may not know their fate officially until tomorrow. What are being referred to as bodies are being left inside the plane and may stay the entire night and not be moved until tomorrow. At this time, the lights are still off here, and this entire stretch of road, as far as the eye can see, there is no power on yet. So again, they are working under the power of generators behind us here and trying to clean up and see if there are any other victims which have not been found. At this time, apparently, people think that we know the extent of the injuries and the deaths so far, and we will probably not have further updates on those numbers for some time. That's the situation here right now, and that's all we know from the south end down here.
Kurt, we know also that reporters are always kept back a good distance just for safety reasons, and so the rescue crews can do their job. I guess we're looking at pretty much a half-mile rescue scene or emergency situation there. Can you actually see the other end?
No, we cannot see all the way through. The road has a curve in it, as well as, of course, plenty of emergency vehicles. I would say a distance of perhaps 200 yards from us is where the wreckage is at this time and where all the work is going on. And another 100 or 200 yards to the other end is where the command post is and where we heard Jerry Orr give the information he gave us earlier, which once again is 16 confirmed dead, 6 missing, 34 transported with various injuries. And we have heard, of course, that the pilot and co-pilot have survived and are not very badly hurt. So we will know a great deal more about what caused all of this as soon as they are able to pass on some information and it is revealed to the public.
And that is good information, Kurt, too. Also, Joey Pop told us from CMC tonight that all of the crew members did survive the accident. As Kurt said, the pilot and co-pilot are in pretty decent shape right now. Minor injuries, to be sure, though. We were told all 5 crew members did survive, so certainly we'll be able to hear from them in the future days exactly what happened on board that plane. From one witness that we had heard earlier, there was a report that nothing was ever said across the speakers or loudspeaker system. No one ever said we're in trouble or get in crash position or brace yourselves. It was apparently a normal landing until. Now, one of the first things that we talked about was the heroes and the heroines, people who dashed in, risked actually their own lives trying to pull people out. We did talk with one of what we know of at least are 4 people who did that. He is a sheriff's deputy. Let's hear from him again.
And when I got down there, the tail section was pretty well intact, and there was a guy, you could hear him in the back banging and all. And I was trying to yell at him. I couldn't get to him. I was trying to yell at him, you know, talk to him. And then I looked behind that, and you could see flames rolling around, and recognized it was a person. So I went back there and got him put out, rolled him around, and put him out. And I drug him out a little ways, and then county police showed up, and he came back there, and we pulled him out a little farther. And
did you see anything else? Did you see any other people or anything?
No, when we was pulling him out, they said that I asked them if they had anybody else, and they said that they thought they had 22 on the other side now.
And a quick correction from something we said earlier. We were saying that they were setting up staffing at the airport. Basically, if your family or friends, the hospital is the central location. So it's Carolina's Medical Center over also on the edge of Dilworth, the edge of uptown Charlotte, for people coming into the area from South Carolina who might have had someone on Columbia's end of that flight. Joining me now, Vahali Dennis, News 36 anchor. You've been out all day pretty much and joining the situation now. I guess it's frenetic here as we attempt to find out what's going on. Have you heard anything when you talked to the police over the phones, anything at all?
No, of course, I was over in Hickory today because of a festival, and Larry Sprinkle and I were there together. He came back to the station. He found out what was going on. He immediately went out, as we do as reporters, and of course he brought back that incredible footage that he shot himself. But you know, the thing that I did realize as soon as I walked in the door from that festival tonight, my phone was ringing off the hook, and I immediately found out and was here.
I think a lot of people around the city just certainly, you're not ready for this. It's July 4th. We're supposed to be having cookouts and that kind of thing, and you flip on the TV and you find the 2 of us sitting here talking about what is really the worst tragedy to hit the city in at least 20 years. That's the last time a plane went down.
You mentioned earlier that we as reporters do see this kind of thing, but I can't tell you, when it ever hits any stronger. I mean, the latest time you hear it is as strong as the last time. It's a horrible thing to happen. Our Ed Gallick, I understand, is live at the command post, ready to talk to us once again. Ed, do you have new information for us?
We are expecting some new information in another 15-20 minutes. To review what we have heard out here most recently, Charlotte City Fire Department says the risk of a explosion or another fire at this point is pretty much over. FAA now is taking over the scene. Most of the firefighters are going home. FAA is now drawing up a diagram of exactly where everything is, where vehicles were parked, where people walked, where debris was found. All of that will help in the investigation. And that brings up another point which we mentioned earlier about the victims inside the plane. They probably will not be removed until sometime tomorrow because, again, to go in there and to start pulling those people out might interfere with the investigation somehow. Right now it is in the FAA's hands, and so those folks will be in there until tomorrow, unfortunately. 33 people injured was the most recent figure we heard. 16 dead. They were still trying to account for 6 other folks. They are believed dead, perhaps still inside the plane as well. We may have to wait until tomorrow for that also. At this point, everyone who is coming back from the scene is using one word more than any other to describe it: mess. It is simply a mess down there. In fact, one fire battalion chief told me that, he says, if you've ever seen something that was hit by artillery and knocked out of the sky, that's what this plane looks like. It is in several sections at the scene. Val?
Ed, have you seen any sign from the NTSB? Of course, they are the first usually to arrive at the scene, also the FAA.
FAA has some local folks here who are in the process of getting things started. Investigators are either here or on their way. Same thing with NTSB. Most of those folks are just in the arriving stages, and most of their work will actually get going tomorrow in daylight. As one police officer said, they are really getting everybody out of that scene. Whether you're a police officer or a firefighter, no matter what your role is, there's really not much more for you to do.
What did it look like? Did you have any kind of inkling or clear idea just what runway they were attempting to approach and where this particular aircraft had gotten into trouble?
No, initially we just assumed it was a landing aircraft, and then we started getting the reports about the possibility that it was on a go-around, and I know that's, I don't think any of that's definite yet, but maybe that would explain.
Chapel Hill to the burn unit. We've been told 7 have been also transported to Presbyterian, 1 to Mercy.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Joey Pop reporting. We're still efforting an attempt to get to WIS, our sister station from NBC in Columbia. I understand reporter Michelle Miller is standing by. Michelle, certainly it has to be an incredible scene down there in Columbia.
Michelle, are you with us? Okay. Michelle, we cannot hear you. Can you hear us?
No, she is speaking.
We're sorry.
Not getting her audio.
We're going to try to get contact with Michelle one more time. She is at Columbia, which is where this flight originated, we understand.
Right. It actually had its stop in Columbia. It originated in Florida, most likely Fort Lauderdale, Florida. They've never confirmed that, but somewhere in southern Florida with a hop to Columbia and then on to Charlotte. 55 people, again, if you're just joining us, 55 people on board the plane. 5 of them were USAir employees. Those 5 survived. Unfortunately, 16 of the passengers on board did not survive. The other 34 right now being treated. All are adults, no children on board this flight.
Yeah, let's continue recapping for just a second for those of you who are just joining us. This all happened just shortly after 8 o'clock. It's now 10:22.
7 o'clock.
After 7 o'clock, excuse me, and say I was still gone, and I am still getting briefed on certain aspects of what exactly happened. But I do understand this, that the plane was on its second attempt at landing, circled around again, was unable to, and it went past the airport, went beyond a grove of trees, hit a couple of power poles, and still I understand at this point there are several hundred homes without power.
Without power right now, yeah. The lines are down, and the plane itself did partially come to rest on top of one of those homes. Conflicting reports tonight of whether or not anyone was in that house. We heard earlier there were 3 and then 5 people inside the house. Then we heard none. So it's certainly one of the things that does have to come out later. But however many there were in the home, apparently none of them are among the fatalities that we know of right now. We're getting instructions on where to go next.
Jerry Orr, we understand, is about to start up a news conference. Do we have Jerry Orr yet?
This is taped earlier. Jerry Orr was speaking to us, I guess, an hour ago. He, of course, is the director of the Charlotte Douglas International Airport.
What you saw when you were down there?
Well, I got here probably within 15 minutes.
airplane. 33 people have been transported to area hospitals. We've confirmed through Jerry Orr, the director of the airport, Charlotte Douglas International Airport, that there are 16 people dead. 6 people are missing. The plane, when it went down, you can see went down on Wallace Neal Road, which is off of Old Dowd Road, which is west of Charlotte Douglas International Airport.
That's right. And at the time, there was a heavy thunderstorm. We spoke with our meteorologist, Derek Thomas, who's busy downstairs working in the AccuWeather Center, but he also told us that he got a report of the conditions of the airport at the time of the crash, and that it was a heavy thunderstorm in progress, 1 mile visibility, and it was occasional cloud-to-ground lightning as well, and that it was 77 degrees outside. Now, there is speculation, and has been, that wind shear may have caused this, or a microburst. Nothing has been confirmed as far as the crash, but Jerry Orr did say that he had no knowledge of the pilot reporting mechanical difficulties prior to the landing, that he landed in the field beside the runway.
And once again, 16 people dead. 2 are critically injured. They're at Carolina's Medical Center. According to doctors, at a press conference about a half an hour ago, we understand one of those critical injuries is a man who is seriously burned, whom they expect to transport to Chapel Hill, to the burn center there, which is the main burn center in our area. And we do know that 6 people are missing.
That's right. A 2-year-old is in critical condition at Presbyterian Hospital. That child's mother also in critical condition, as you're continuing to look at Sky 3 footage of this incredible scene. A 30-year-old man is in the emergencies room still being treated. The crew did survive, however. I did want to tell you that the crew survived. The pilot and co-pilot were injured, right, Maura?
Yes,
as
they're
well
at
as
Carolina's Medical Center.
Flight attendant also injured, but they did survive. A woman in her 30s managed to escape with minor injuries, and they have another man in ER with burns and fractures. This is nighttime video now.
And you're looking at the house into which this plane crashed, and it is, we understand that it is the home of the Dunn family. We understand at least 2 of those people have been transported to Carolina's Medical Center. According to doctors there, one of those people was burned, although he described the burns as minor burns. So the person also had an inhalation injury, which often happens when you get superheated air. You breathe in the superheated air, or you breathe in flames, and it closes up your windpipe. It makes it very difficult to breathe and can sometimes burn the insides of your lungs. Those are very difficult injuries to treat, and that person did have inhalation injuries.
And we spoke with our pilot, Sky 3 pilot Marshall Scott, who said that the plane landed about 33 degrees off the heading of the runway. He was supposed to land, the pilot was supposed to land on runway 36 right, and this plane apparently clipped a power pole before crashing tonight, and officials at Duke Power tell us they have about 700 customers without electricity as a result. There is no timetable. We do not know when the power may be restored. Duke said it's working with the FAA, but that crews, Duke Power crews, are not being allowed into the sealed area around the crash site where the lines are broken. And so tonight, the investigators are there working with portable generators in West Charlotte, and we understand that traffic around the area obviously is chaos.
Yes, but a piece of information, the airport is open. The airport is apparently open and running on schedule. It did not, this crash did not affect operations at the airport. Carolina's Medical Center and all the hospitals in the area are also running as usual. We do know that the Red Cross would like to have blood donations, although not tonight. They are not prepared to take blood donations tonight. They will be prepared to take them tomorrow. There are 2 locations at which you can give blood tomorrow. One of them is at the main Red Cross office on Park Road, and they're going to be open from 10 o'clock until 5, I think he said. Also, another one is Covenant Presbyterian Church, and that's on Moorhead, and they'll be open from 11:15 until 3.
Okay, we wanted to let you see an interview we had, a press conference that the aviation director, the airport aviation director, Jerry Orr, had, and he was giving us an update on the number of injuries. This is an interesting...
One of the people who was nearby at the time is our Tim Kenny, who is also a commercial pilot. You were on the scene almost immediately afterwards. It had to be a frightening and horrific feeling.
It was. I would describe it as sort of an organized chaos, or at least it got organized in rather short order. The emergency personnel that got there immediately were doing triage with the crash victims. The most seriously injured obviously were being tended to, but there were people there that all you could do was comfort them for one reason or the other, and there were passengers there. I spoke to one guy who was quite dazed and was really unsure of what was going on. His hair was singed all the way back to his skull. His shirt was gone. He was sort of beet red. He looked like someone who'd been sunburned, although obviously that was not the case.
We had heard some of the passengers were saying that there was no warning. Is that what he told you?
That's exactly what he told me. He said it had been a routine flight up from Columbia. Obviously, that would be a short flight from Columbia, 15 or 20 minutes, and he said that everything was normal, and then the first thing he saw and felt was a fireball.
Tim, there were reports of people running from the scene actually on fire.
I talked to a couple of people who saw that. I personally did not see that. It's quite miraculous that that there were survivors in an accident like this, and it appears as if the wings separated from the main part of the fuselage, taking with them the fuel tanks and obviously the main source of combustion. And I think the fact that there are survivors, certainly in the numbers that we're seeing, can be attributed to that. It's very remarkable.
For people who aren't familiar with aircraft, you are a pilot. Tell us about the DC-9. What kind of a plane is it? What can it do?
It's not a new plane. DC-9s have been in service for probably 25 years or so. It's a twin-engine DC, standing for Douglas Continental. The new version of that is something called an MD-80, and that's being phased in with American Airlines a lot, Delta Airlines, and USAir. DC-9 probably is configured to hold about 100 passengers, typically used for short haul trips below maybe 500 miles. It's not modern in that it's not incredibly efficient, it's not incredibly quiet, but it has a good service record, certainly.
Okay, thank you.
Tim, why don't you stay with us for just a little bit more information, because I would like some more background on the DC-9 and exactly what you saw tonight. But let's now go to Kurt Lee. He's back at the scene of the crash tonight. Kurt, do you have new information for us at this point?
As we stand here right now, Rick and Val, we can see a few more of the emergency crews are leaving one at a time. They're trickling out of here. And as you can hear, the roar of jet engines as planes continue to take off. And you can only wonder what goes through the minds of certain people aboard those planes when they take a look down at what's going on here. It is completely dark here. There is no power except for the power of the generators lighting the crash scene behind me. We're told that a crew from the National Transportation Safety Board, the NTSB, has already arrived here from Washington, D.C. They will be here. One of the very most important things they will be looking for is the black box, which records exactly what happened aboard the plane at the time and before the time of the crash. We're told that that may not be very hard to locate, and here's the reason. We're told that the cockpit of the airplane was resting right on Wallace Neal Road here, 200 yards behind me, when that plane and the wreckage of the plane finally came to a stop. The good news, as we heard earlier, is apparently the best report we have is that people were not injured on the ground, which of course could have been multiplying this tragedy a great deal more. That's the latest information we have here. The scene continues to wind down as emergency crews who have done their best and done all they can to control both flames and treat injuries are now done and leaving for the night. Back to you, Rick and Val.
Okay, thank you, Kurt Lee, reporting out there. He made an interesting point about the cockpit of the aircraft coming to rest actually on the pavement on Wallace Neal Road. Before we went to Kurt, we were talking with Tim Kenny here, who is also a pilot, as he was telling us, and certainly that has to be why the 5 crew people were able to simply walk away from the accident, I guess.
Yeah, and if you look at the actual cockpit section, it's quite amazing, because fully 1/3 of it is sort of collapsed up into the rest of it, and it's quite miraculous when you see it. But yes, that wreckage is about at a 45-degree angle across the road up there where you see the flashing lights, what we just saw a moment ago, and probably the first maybe 40% of the fuselage is actually resting on the pavement itself.
People are wondering why you don't see the actual airplane itself. Well, it is in the woods and certainly scattered all over a very big accident site. And the rescue crews are far more important than the media. We certainly do not need to be up close to where that is. And I'm sure over the days you will see pictures, but right now there is no way to see that craft. There was one piece visible there. You could see the S from USAir, and there was nothing else there on tape.
Probably the only reason I was able to get there is I got there quite quickly.
Tim, maybe you can describe for us what may have been happening. Why did the airplane circle around and it was on its second attempt to land? What do you think may have been happening?
If indeed that happened, the pilot, the captain of the aircraft, can opt to call for a go-round at any time, which is just to abort the landing. The airplane is in what's called a dirty configuration. It's not really configured for very quick flying. It's got its flaps out, the wing slats on the front of the aircraft would be deployed. Obviously, the landing gear would be down. So it's not an aircraft that's real conducive to doing anything quickly. And for example, wind shear studies show that in simulators, they'll put pilots through wind shear studies, and I'm not saying that's what happened, but if something like that did happen from a thunderstorm, you know, they have to work do things exactly right to survive the most serious cases. And we know that it takes, for a jet like this, it could take 8 to 9 seconds to spool up the jet engines to full power. And when an airplane is in that dirty configuration, you need that full power to get it through a serious situation. So as you know, that close to the ground, 8 to 9 seconds, a lot can happen.
Eternity.
Yeah, it absolutely is. So the aircraft is very vulnerable in those last few hundred feet.
How far would you say from the end of the runway the craft was where you saw the cockpit rested?
It would probably have been, what I saw was probably a third of the way down the runway, several hundred yards displaced to the west of the runway, and that would be runway 18 right, which is the largest south to north runway. The aircraft would have made its approach over I-85, over Wilkinson Boulevard, and over Old Dowd Road, for people who are familiar with the west side of the airport, very near where that observation deck is and where the big white fuel tanks are.
We're still trying to get more information about the survivors, those, of course, who were victims of this crash. What can you tell us about where is the safest part of the plane on a DC-9?
That's a good question. There have been studies. There's been at least one book written about it. And really, statistically, there's not that big of a difference. A lot of people think that it's safest to be in the back of an aircraft, and certainly there have been anecdotal reports where that has been the case. Most of us can remember back in the mid-'80s a flight number 191 in Dallas, Fort Worth, a big DC-10. We remember seeing that charred piece of the tail section, and that's where the survivors were in that crash, largely attributable to the fact that there was so much fire involved in that accident. In this accident, if indeed we do find that the wings broke free from the main part of the wreckage, which again, my few minutes on the scene, it looked like to me that would have taken the fire away from the aircraft, and so it would have been a matter of, I guess, what parts were exposed to fire and what parts hit the hardest.
Perhaps morbid question, but are the planes designed so the wings would peel off like that to maybe elevate the risk of survival?
No, it's something that's an issue that's been studied, Rick. Obviously, structural integrity, airplanes have to fly a whole lot more than they crash, and so what we're most concerned about is keeping those wings on. An area of great study over the last couple of decades is what can be done in those fuel cells and with the fuel itself to keep it from igniting. In a crash, jet fuel, by the way, is basically kerosene, and in a crash it tends to spread rapidly and atomize, and that's when the fires happen, and that's what they've been trying to study more than anything.
Interesting points. Thank you, Tim Kenny, reporting for us tonight.
Ed Gallick is back at the command post, and Ed joins us once again. Ed, what can you tell us?
Well, right now we have a police helicopter taking off from the scene. The activity here at the command center has settled down considerably. People are not running around anymore and so forth. Now that the FAA is taking over the actual scene for their investigation, most of the local folks have pretty much done their job, and they are, just like the rest of us now, asking many of those same questions. Power crews have come by here. We are about 500, maybe 600 yards from the crash scene. If you look over my right shoulder on the other side of that branch, you can see one of the telephone poles that was snapped off. Poles are snapped in succession all down this road here, perhaps pulled down as the plane went across the lines down the road there, but it pulled off and snapped off lines all the way up to crews are now here to begin trying to figure out how to get power back to those who don't have it and so forth.
Yeah, to repeat, for those people who are just joining us, there were about 400 homes, I understand, that are without power still because of the crash, Ed?
That I'm not hearing out here. Okay. That's probably something that these repair crews will be trying to determine as they're out here trying to hook everybody back up.
Okay, of course, the plane, upon trying to land that second time around, as it was going down, hit several light poles.
You can see that in the video from earlier.
Poles.
Yeah, took out power poles and again landed on the one home there. It's certainly been an eventful evening, and one of the biggest places of action has been Carolinas Medical Center, and again, our Joey Pop is standing by live.
Yes, Rick, 14 patients are being treated here. We understand 3 are crewmen, 2 in the cockpit, 1 a flight attendant. 2 are very critical as far as passengers. 1 looks to be transported to Chapel Hill tonight at the burn unit. Just around 10 o'clock this evening, doctors had a briefing right here in this room. We'll now roll that tape.
A big problem with this sort of an incident is information. Fortunately, we had some information from Dr. Blackwell There were conflicting reports about numbers of people, so we went ahead and initiated the highest level of disaster, which resulted in a more than adequate supply of staff, critical care units, anesthesiology and anesthetist teams, operating rooms that were available. Dr. Hollenbeck and Dr. Novick coordinated the surgical resources. The media obviously was there was a place for them, so there was we actually expected and were prepared to get many more patients than we did receive.
Again, what was the exact number that you treated in the emergency room, and how many have been taken to care?
I believe 14 patients were received here, and Dr. Novick may be able to answer better how many actually ended up in the operating room versus the intensive care units.
We tried to establish when the patients came in the acuity of their illness, who was the most seriously hurt and who needed to go directly to the operating room or needed some sort of life-saving maneuver in the emergency room. After those things were sorted out, we ended up sending 4 patients to the recovery room, which we used as sort of a secondary ICU, patients we felt who were stable but needed further evaluation but did not need to take up the most acute resources that we had. Of those other patients, 4 of them ended up in the operating room. We had a great response from the operating room staff and from the anesthesia and from other general surgeons, and we were actually able and set up to be running 15 operating rooms. Only 4 were required at this point in time. And the rest of the patients went to the trauma intensive care unit for further evaluation and stabilization. So our goal was to assess the patients, those that needed life-saving maneuvers, take care of them in the emergency room, triage the patients that needed to go to the operating room, and then the ones which were sicker and needed further evaluation to move them out of the emergency room where we could take care of them in the trauma unit.
I understand the scene is quite graphic. The injuries that you've seen, depict that?
Probably the most graphic injuries were several patients were very seriously burned. Several had burns about their head and face, and what we would term inhalation injuries, where their head and face and their airways would swell so they'd not be able to breathe. Those patients we tried to get intubated, put a breathing tube in them, and get them on a ventilator.
Do you have crew members?
We do have 3 crew members that I'm aware of.
Dr. Novick, it may be early, but can you tell us, are any of these injuries now life-threatening? Is it possible that some of these people might not make it?
We have 2 patients right now who are very critical, and that's all I can say right now. We have others on the list who are still critical, still being evaluated, but at least by the first evaluation should survive.
The 2 very critical burn victims?
One is a very extensive burn, probably 50 to 60% of the total body surface area. And the second patient appears that she may have a spinal injury and perhaps some cardiac problems as well.
Will they remain here? Will they be transported?
We probably will transfer the burn patient to Chapel Hill.
Children, adults?
All adults.
Can you tell us about the crew members? Where are they based out of?
I had no conversations with them at all in terms of where they were from. Or our main goal was to take care of their injuries and make sure that they were going to survive.
Pilot, flight attendants, do you know?
We had one flight attendant who has gone to the operating room for an open fracture of her leg. And we had 2, I think the pilot and co-pilot came in. They were being evaluated for orthopedic injuries. Were not among the most seriously injured, at least on the first evaluation.
What about notification of family relatives?
I can't speak at that. Perhaps the ER staff can.
It's underway. There are no family members.
Now, one interesting note, we understand there were representatives here from USAir, but they were not allowed to talk with us. We were not able to get information from the crew that actually have been treated here at Carolina's Medical Center. Now, in addition to the 14 people being treated here, we understand 7 transported to Presbyterian Hospital and 1 at Mercy. And these injuries, as we were told, were not life-threatening. So with Carolina's Medical Center being the trauma unit here in Charlotte, this is where the most severe, the most critical were actually sent. Val, back to you.
All right, thank you very much, Joey. As is the case in the hospital, after a calamity like this, the doctors, staff immediately go to the scene of the hospital, do what they can, they evaluate who is at greatest risk and greatest need, and they work as a team. And it's often exactly what happens here in a newsroom as well.
And one of the people who you've not seen all night, even though we've all been working, is Alicia Booth, who has been at the scene and now has a quick video version of what has happened throughout the night.
Smoke filled the sky, but rescuers fought and choked their way through it to save anyone they could.
The tail section was pretty well intact, and there was a guy, you could hear him in the back banging and all. And I was trying to yell at him. I couldn't get to him. I was trying to yell at him, you know, talk to him. And then,
Lord, just to thank the Lord, because he spared me. And I say he just got something for me to do here. He spared me.
Tell me about when you stepped out and you saw all that. Were there...
Unbelievable. You can't believe the sight. It's like being at a 3D movie where they bring the action close to you. It's horrible. You know, it was just horrible. And my mind, it was just, you know, messing with my mind because it was so horrible to be right there in it. I couldn't believe that this was happening.
Tell me about your injuries. You were injured.
Yeah, well, my back and my neck and my shoulders and my arm, and on this side, it's just like intense pain, soreness and all. They took x-rays at the hospital, but no broken bones. I'm thankful for that.
Do you think something hit your car? Did something hit your car that caused it to spin like that?
I don't know. I believe so, because when I went through that fire, because fire went across the road. The fire went across the road, and the car started turning. It turned, and then it came to a stop, and I just saw stuff flying. I mean, big chunks of airplane, burnt pieces of airplane.
Did you hear anything? Were there people running to the scene?
I heard screaming in the background. I heard screaming. And there were people coming close to go farther to help. I heard lots of screaming.
What was going through your mind then?
It was just, all I could just say was, thank you, Lord. I just kept thanking the Lord.
And you're going to be okay?
Yes.
You're going to be okay physically. How are you dealing with this right now?
It's here. It's on my mind. It's here. I'm just thankful. And just, you know, I just was glad that they got there to help people, help as many people as they could.
It's been a heck of an evening for you.
It has been an evening.
And thank God you're okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Cheryl Torrance, who was in the car. When you look at the pictures and you see a white vehicle that is going across the street, that is the vehicle that Cheryl Torrance was driving just as this flight crashed on Wallace Neal Road. Lisa and Maura.
This is incredible, incredible story, a major story, Mike. The last time a fire crash happened was 1974, but as you saw Cheryl there, she was thankful to God. There are a lot of people who are thankful to God, a lot of the survivors, a lot of prayers going out, a lot of people asking, how can we help? How can we help? We're going to tell you how you can help in just a moment, but let's recap. For those of you just tuning in, you might be getting ready to tune in for the 11 o'clock news, wondering why is Maura and why am I sitting here? We're here to report to you live continuing coverage of the crash of Flight 1016. That is USAir Flight 1016. It is a DC-9 that originated out of Colombia, picked up 55 passengers on its way to Charlotte when it crashed at 6:50 p.m. just shy of the runway. It was attempting to land on runway 36 right. It landed 33 degrees off the heading of the runway.
And it landed on Wallace Neal Road. It went into a home that is on Wallace Neal Road. When it crashed, it landed first hit a field, clipped telephone pole wires. It clipped power lines, clearly, because there's power out in the area, and then landed, came to rest on a home. We understand 5 people live there. 2 of those people have been taken to the hospital. That is the Dunn family who lives in that home. And there you see on the screen, 18 people are confirmed dead. 2 people critically injured at Carolina's Medical Center. 31 others are injured. 6 people are missing. They are still searching for those bodies there at the scene.
And this is all video taped earlier, just moments after the crash. We understand at 6:50 this evening, you see the windshield wipers going on the firefighter's engine there. Heavy thunderstorm is what we have understood. The meteorologist Eric Thomas told us that a heavy thunderstorm was in progress at the time. 1 mile visibility, occasional cloud to ground lightning, but we do not know if weather was a factor per se.
Now, we do know that the pilot was told to do a go-around, which means that he was waved off of the landing, told not to land because there was still another plane that had not completely cleared its takeoff. We don't know if it was still on the runway, but we know that it did not meet the regulations to allow the plane to land, so the pilot was given the go-around. Now, if you have relatives on this flight, or you have relatives, or you think you might have relatives who are on this flight, you have questions, you're asked to call USAir. Just call USAir and ask questions of them.
Exactly. More, I've been told that the runway was 18 right. Earlier we thought it was 36 right, but now we have been told that it is 18 right, that was the intended runway for this USAir DC-9 to land.
Now, we do know that the pilot and the co-pilot on this plane did survive. They are at Carolina's Medical Center. According to a press conference that was held earlier in the evening, we're told that they have mostly orthopedic injuries, which would be bone impact injuries, broken bones of some sort. And we do know that at least 2 of the flight attendants, one was in the operating room at Carolina's Medical Center, one was confirmed at Presbyterian Hospital.
And that 2 of the injured were in the house, is what we've been told. It was amazing that that was the only injuries, and we were told that they were not necessarily terribly serious injuries from people who were living inside the home that was run into by the plane. Some more reports of injuries from Presbyterian Hospital, who has 7 patients there, a 2-year-old in critical condition, that child's mother also in critical, a 13-year-old boy has 2nd-degree burns, 30-year-old man also injured, flight attendant, you mentioned Maura, was also injured, a woman in her 30s managed to escape with minor injuries, and we talked to an eyewitness, Ron Bass, who was an eyewitness who said that he saw, when he went on the scene, a young man dressed in a camouflage military uniform in the weeds who was burned from his waist down. He has about 80% of his body burned, and we assume that that's probably the one of the critically injured who is being taken to Chapel Hill Burn Center.
Possibly. They tell us most of the injuries are burn injuries. The most seriously injured will be taken to that burn center there in Chapel Hill.
Shortly after the actual call went out that there was a plane crash, I live close by the hospital, and I was here about the same time when the doctors were rolling in, right before the first ambulances and also the helicopters came in. I can tell you that they did respond very quickly. We've been told that they call it a code 3 here, where they ask for more than 20 emergency workers on standby or get ready to actually take in the emergency. But we've been told that as many as 40 doctors were here working this scene tonight. Now, they are off that code 3 as we speak. 14 people are being treated. 2 very critical. 1 may be on their way to Chapel Hill to the burn unit. Also, 7 being treated at Presbyterian Hospital and 1 at Mercy. Also, on a personal note, Val and Rick, I was in Charlotte 20 years ago when the last big airplane crash took place here. That was the Eastern flight that went down, and it came in from Charleston, South Carolina. It was a very sad day then also. That plane went down near Olympic High School. And it's very ironic that it was 20 years ago this fall, and many of us from the media here have been talking about that tonight.
And also, Joey, I believe that was a DC-9 as well.
Yes, it was, as I understand it, Rick.
An Eastern Airlines jet, we understand 60 people were killed. Joey, thank you.
Yes, I was a sophomore in college. I was not working in the business at that time, but I had a very good friend, Bob Schellenberg, who was one of the first on the scene, and I had several conversations with him of what he saw, and I'm sure the emergency workers and our reporters that have been out on the scene tonight saw a similar sight.
Joey, just to recap real quickly, a quick question here. Again, all of the injuries you have heard about tonight, are they burn-related or impact-related or a mixture?
Val, there is a mixture. Now, one of the very critical, we've been told she might have spinal injuries, and the other very critical is a burn victim, more than 60% of his body.
Okay, thank you. And we heard from Tim Kenny about people being burned about the head and the hands in many cases. One of the places we also want to check is Grant Ewing. You're asking why. Well, we were talking about at 6:50, a heavy storm did come across the area. The possibility of the storm having something to do with this plane going down. Grant was checking the radar at that time and joins us now.
Thank you, Rick and Val. Yes, of course, the accident was about 6:50. The forecast for tonight was some scattered showers and thunderstorms as a certain possibility. As you know, that in this business, the thunderstorms at this time of the year can pop up and dissipate very, very quickly, and they can pop up within just a matter of minutes. We were on the air at 6:30, Rick, and our Storm Seeker Doppler radar was just beginning to show some showers and thunder showers. This particular picture you're looking at right now, This radar with our storm seeker was at 6:58, and you can see the storm. That is the cell that was just over the airport. Now, at this time here, it's about 8 or 9 minutes after the crash. The storm was moving to the north at about 5 to 10 miles an hour, as the best we can tell. So the storm has just moved to the north of the airport in that picture that you're looking at right there. There are some yellows and reds indicative in that storm seeker radar shot there of some very heavy rains. Now, it's pure speculation on my part. The National Transportation Safety Board will certainly be looking at this thunderstorm cell and will dissect it to find out if there was any wind shear. That is a sudden shift in winds, which could have possibly, this is just speculation now, drove that plane down. In a thunderstorm, downdraft or downburst winds can certainly occur in a mature thunderstorm cell, which this was, which developed in just a matter of minutes right over the airport, or just to the south of us, south of the airport. If you were 5 miles or even a block or two in any other direction, you may have not seen any of the rain, but it was, according to witnesses, raining, and with that some showers and thunderstorms with lightning in and around the area of the accident. Now, of course, this is just speculation. They will certainly look at this very carefully as to one of the causes, or perhaps one of the reasons why this U.S. jet went down about 6:50 tonight. Rick and Val?
And Grant, let's go to Ed Gallick. We're not going to go to Ed. Ed is standing by there, though, and we do understand that we are going to possibly be talking to Jerry Orr, of course, the airport director.
Right, you heard from Jerry perhaps an hour or so ago, but obviously he's been working hard tonight and we'll have more for us. One of the things Grant was just mentioning there was talking about how the storm did move. You could see on the storm seeker Doppler radar how the big red cell was north of the city at that time, but as he said, they can pop up, and that picture being taken 8 minutes after the accident, certainly that cell could have been right on top of that airplane. And as he said, speculation.
Yeah, he mentioned, and the radar really told a story of how concentrated that storm was. You know, I think we've all been in...
I have not had any word.
What is the latest numbers on the response tonight?
The City Information Director, Bill Garant.
This evening we had 25 Charlotte police units responded. This was a 5-alarm for the Charlotte Fire Department. The chief on the scene said it's the only 5-alarm he recalls having ever pulled in Charlotte. He's been with the department, I believe, 25 years.
This is the biggest response ever.
To this chief's knowledge, yes. 175 Charlotte firemen responded with 30 vehicles. 175. Also, we think an equal number, 150, 175, from other local volunteer fire departments, rescue units. So it was a very big effort this evening responding to the crash.
Did this all go according to plan? I mean, you all have rehearsed this kind of thing before. Did it go according to the plan?
Well, we think the response was very good. Now, there's always a critique after any kind of disaster, but at this time the response looks quite good, and I would of course leave it to the fire and police and rescue officials to make any judgment on that.
Is there anything else you can tell us about this bill that we probably don't already know?
No, I think those numbers and what Jerry's previously said pretty well sums it up at this point.
Bill, thank you.
We do have police and fire and other units now leaving the scene. The scene is now secured, and they don't feel that they need as many people here now, so they're going to be tightening it up for the evening.
And we await the investigation.
Certainly.
Bill Grant, City Information Director, and before him, Jerry Orr, the manager of Douglas Airport, what we call the Aviation Director for the city. This is Mike Koza reporting live from the scene.
All right, we do have information that the entire crew of 5 of the USAir DC-9 Flight 1016 jet survived. That is from USAir, that the entire crew of 5 survived.
And that the home was owned by Martha and Walter Dunn, and that they were not home at the time. They thank their lucky stars for that. WBTV News coverage of the crash of Flight 1016 will continue.
CTV. Tonight on News 36 Nightcast.
They're sticking out.
You can see that half of the cockpit is crushed. It would be as if half the airplane, half of the fuselage is just completely crushed. The remnants of the wings are non-existent.
You are looking at, or will be, a live picture of a tragedy, a terrible tragedy. It happened just northwest of Charlotte Douglas International Airport about 4 hours and 10 minutes ago. A DC-9 USAir Flight 1016 with 55 people on board crashed on its approach to the airport. And again, there is that live picture from at least near the scene. 33 people survived the crash, but the death toll is high. Thus far, 18 people are known dead, 4 are missing, 33 people again survived the crash. Now, the death toll, as we mentioned, 18 people. That number continues to change. There are some people who are still unaccounted for. Fortunately, though, the good news, if there is indeed any good news to come out of this tonight, 33 people apparently did manage to survive the crash. Some of them, though, suffered some rather severe burns. One of those injured, we understand, is a motorist who was taken to Presbyterian Hospital. He was hit by flying debris from the aircraft. The USAir DC-9 crashed again shortly before 7 o'clock tonight between 6:40 and 6:50. Now, one of the first people on the scene was our own News 36's Glenn Counts. Glenn is very near the actual crash site. And Glenn, what's happening out there right now?
Well, Dave, I believe it would be fair to say that words are simply inadequate in terms of describing what took place here. I talked to one officer who has been on the force for 8 years. He has seen many murders. He has seen bodies in all types of condition, under all types of circumstances, but he hasn't seen anything like this tonight. He won't be able to sleep tonight, nor will anyone else who saw what happened here. No one who saw this tragedy will ever forget it. It began as just a routine landing.
We was driving down the highway here, and the plane just fell out there across the street right there, and a big old pile of smoke, fire just went up in flames and everything. I told my wife here, told her to stop, back up. But we wasn't more like 50 feet from the plane and everything. It just amazing. I never seen.
As terrible as that was, it got even worse as survivors fled the aircraft. Witnesses who wanted to help realized there was little they could do.
People started coming everywhere, just screaming, help me, help me. This little boy's arm was just, skin was off of it, and we got out, we went to the plane, everybody just started coming out. Only thing we saw was it explode.
Witnesses say that most of the survivors were in the rear section of the aircraft. Most of the victims were in the front. It's clear that it will be a long time before observers forget what they have seen.
Like the lady there crying, said, help me, help me. I couldn't help her. I said, just lie still and everything. The little boy come out crying, burn all up and everything. It's never seen anything like it.
It's like you're in shock a little bit.
Yeah, she is. She just started crying, you know. I told her, just come on, walk away.
It was awful. It's the worst thing I'd ever seen in my whole life. The worst thing.
Looking at a live picture of Wallace Neal Road now, and I believe that you can see there is a lot less traffic on this road. Some of the fire units have been called away. The emergency medical portion of this tragedy is also over. Right now, the scene has been secured, and even though there are some bodies that are still on the plane, they will not be moved until the morning. The scene has been secured in order to give FAA investigators and NTSB investigators a chance to look over the wreckage, to look over every inch of the aircraft and the scene in order to get a good idea as to what caused this crash. Dave?
Kurt, Glenn, you might have already mentioned this, and if you have, I apologize, but have any of the personnel from the National Transportation Board who flew down this evening from Washington, D.C., arrived on the scene that you know about?
Well, we know that the FAA is here, but we're not sure about the NTSB. I would imagine that they are here, even though, you know, we're in a position where we're not really able to get official conversation on this side of the crash.
All right. Glenn, thank you very much. I know it's been a long night, and you've been a real yeoman with this. Glenn Counts reporting live tonight from near the scene of a terrible tragedy that happened about 6:40 or 6:50 this evening, just northwest of Charlotte Douglas International Airport. The reason I brought up the National Transportation Safety Board, even though the FAA might be on the scene, the final determination of the cause of the crash must come from the personnel who flew down from Washington this evening, and as Glenn mentioned, probably are on the scene right now. But as Glenn also mentioned, probably too, there are still some bodies on there on the plane as well. Joining me now is a reporter and also a commercial pilot and a weather person, and a person who is also one of the first on the scene. Tim Kenny joins us tonight, and you've been joining us throughout this evening. I'm glad at least your clothes have had a chance to dry out. Your injuries, you must have been running through some briar patches earlier tonight to get to the scene. What was the first thing that hit you when you arrived and you saw what was happening there?
Probably the enormity of it, Dave. We're all used to seeing large jet aircraft, but we're not used to seeing them broken into pieces spread across a highway. And what I would describe as an organized chaos. The chaos, obviously, the fracturing of the aircraft, the human toll that was all around on the ground being tended to, but the organization, the emergency personnel, the dignity with which the victims that were conscious were conducting themselves. It was certainly a scene of contrast.
What I'm sure a lot of people in the Charlotte area know is that you are an author. You just completed one book. It has been published. It's out in the marketplace now. But ironically, as we're speaking, you're also doing research and about to get into a project of writing another book, and that would have to do with plane crashes.
That's right.
You've studied a lot of plane crashes. You were, one of the first on the scene of this terrible tragedy tonight. How would you compare this crash with some of the others that you have already researched?
Well, this is if weather turns out to have played a factor in this accident, of course, we will not know that until the NTSB rules several months from now. But if it does, this is not unusual for what we've seen in the last couple of decades in plane crashes. There was a thunderstorm in the area. There was the aircraft apparently was on final approach. The most notable accident that I can think of similar to this, that's indelibly etched into many of our memories, happened in the mid to late 80s. I don't know the exact year, but it was a large DC-10 that crashed at Dallas-Fort Worth, and we can all picture the charred wreckage of the tail there. So this is of that genre, certainly.
Okay. Tim Kenny, one of the first people who was on the scene, thank you for sharing your experience with us. I know it's been a very tough night for you as well. Thank you. Well, at this point, much of the attention is focusing on the command center, which has been set up near the crash site. Manning that center, as he has done throughout the evening, is News 36's Ed Gallick. And Ed, what's been happening out there since at least we talked last, which was about an hour and a half ago?
Dave, just a few minutes ago, I spoke with Jerry Orr, the airport manager who has been kind of the spokesman for most of the night. And let me see if I can clear up a couple of things. Earlier, the Associated Press reported that 18 were dead. Jerry Orr said a few minutes ago 33 injured, as we reported earlier, 17 confirmed dead, 5 still missing. And that is why you may be able to hear in the background the motor of a helicopter. The Charlotte City Police helicopter has been hovering throughout the last hour or so throughout the area, looking with an infrared camera and looking with spotlights, searchlights, trying to see if they can find those other 5 people. Jerry did say earlier, though, those 5 may still be on the plane, but again, since the FAA is securing the crash scene, no one can really get in there and poke around and remove those bodies. They will be there until tomorrow. Also, the NTSB, he told me a few minutes ago, is not yet here. Investigators from the NTSB are on their way from both Atlanta and Washington, but the FAA has started its investigation. And Dave, as you mentioned earlier, the FAA will do the preliminary investigation. The NTSB will do the final determination of what caused this crash. This was quite a flurry of activity earlier this evening, and our T.G. Shuck, a photographer, was one of the first people on the scene, and he put together this report. Take a look.
When I got down there, the tail section was pretty well intact, and there was a guy, you could hear him in the back banging and all. I looked behind that, and you could see flames rolling around, and recognized it was a person, so I went back there and got him put out, rolled him around, and put him out.
The noise was so loud, the plane going overhead, that it scared me, and I just automatically ducked down in the car. It was real loud. It was a real loud booming noise, and I thought, well, it's going to hit me. And the rain was coming down so heavy when it went over, I knew it was going to hit the ground. I knew it was too low. It had to be because of the noise was too loud.
And I looked at my friend here and I said, well, if that was thunder, and I don't think it was thunder, and then the lights flickered and we're going on and off, and then that's when we came outside and we're told that a plane had crashed.
The people in the fellowship building, they did hear a big boom, and they couldn't understand what it was. They went to the window to see if thundering, lightning.
And if you are shaking your head after listening to all of that and looking at some of the pictures, so are a lot of the police officers and firefighters, rescue personnel. They are just walking back from the scene saying it is simply a mess down there.
I'm sure a lot of you are wondering about the conditions of the people at the hospital. Let's go live now to our Joey Pop, who is at Carolina's Medical Center. Joey?
Well, Ed, many of those emergency workers were here hours ago transporting the injured. 14 here were transported to Carolina's Medical Center. We just got word that one of those patients has died, a woman who was very critically injured, a spinal injury, we've been told. She passed away within the last 30 minutes. There were 7 other patients that were being treated at Presbyterian this evening and 1 at Mercy Hospital, but it was a very hectic evening here tonight. Emergency crews from Gaston County, Mint Hill, all over the area, West Mecklenburg, bringing the injured in. More than 40 doctors here standing by in a code 3 at the Carolinas Medical Center, and just within the last hour they had a press briefing. I believe we're going to roll some tape on that.
Probably the most graphic injuries were several patients were very seriously burned. Several had burns about their head and face, and what we would term inhalation injuries, where their head and face and their airways would swell so they'd not be able to breathe. Those patients we tried to get intubated, put a breathing tube in them, and get them on a ventilator.
Once again, one of those patients has died here at Carolinas Medical, a woman who was very critically injured, a spinal injury. Dave, back to you.
Joy, in light of that, we have been saying for the past couple of minutes that 18, and we talked about this earlier too, that these numbers are going to change, which is really unfortunate, but it's realistic. You had mentioned that a woman just died. This would bring then the death toll from 18 to 19 at this point, right?
I believe that's correct. And something else that is confusing at this hour, we were told that 14 were transported here, a total of 8 at the other 2 hospitals. That makes a total of 22. And Jerry Orr earlier this evening said that 33, I believe 33 or 34 were transported. So there is some confusion of what happened to the other 11 or 12. And of course, Ed Gallick in his report just told us that they are looking for at least 5.
Yeah, and again, Joey, and you know, I'll let you go because I know you're very busy, and we thank you very much, Joey Pop, reporting live from the Carolinas Medical Center. But the reason for number of the changes, as you've been hearing throughout the evening, is simply this: it's just a matter of math. There are 55 people on the plane, a crew of 5. But now remember that one person who was rushed to the Presbyterian Hospital, who was in an automobile that was hit from some of the debris of the plane. So you can't. It's just not a matter of simple subtraction here when you're talking about something like this, because there's a periphery out there where other people could have indeed been injured. Well, the Carolinas Medical Center is not the only hospital keeping busy because of this terrible tragedy tonight. We understand at least 10 victims have been taken to Gaston Memorial Hospital. Some of the injured, we are also told, were also taken, as you well know by now, to Presbyterian Hospital in Charlotte. The impact of the crash caused most of the injuries, as did the subsequent fire. News 36 has learned that some of the passengers were, as you can imagine, severely burned. Well, ironically, some of the first and most descriptive video taken at the site was shot by News 36's Larry Sprinkle. Larry joins us now, well, I was going to say from the Outdoor Weather Center because I'm so used to saying that. But at any rate, you were one of the first people on the scene. You have some very descriptive, graphic video that you're going to be sharing with us. And this is going to leave a memory with you for a long time, because I know that you also covered the crash in Charlotte in 1974, in which, what, 60 people, I believe, were killed.
I can't remember the exact figures, but it was somewhere between 56 and 60. It was an Eastern Airlines plane that went down not too far, not too many miles away from this particular crash site, September 1974, and I was working at radio at the time and happened to cover that crash, and any time there's a crash, it's a real tragedy. And the video that we're going to see right here, Dave, was shot, this is just a camcorder. You can see the impact points right there. You can see actually where the plane came in over a fence, probably a couple hundred feet in the air, and then the impact crash site is right there in that clump of woods. You can see even some of the, this is like an hour, probably an hour, 45 minutes to an hour after the crash, and we zoomed in there, and you can see the personnel on there, the emergency workers at the crash site. That home is right in that area right there, and this particular crash site is not that far away from Douglas Airport, which is right in the background. This is some of the emergency vehicles on the way to the crash site right there, Dave. I looked at a clump of trees which are just in front of the crash site. No damage to those trees, and what I'm going to do is pan around and show you how close close the crash site is. This is just...
Falling out of a cloud will cool that column of air. As you know, hot air rises, therefore cold air sinks. And this air can come down at a very high velocity. When it hits the ground, it spreads out. Now, what does that mean? Well, an airplane trying to enter it, and we'll show that to you now, and again, this is not supposed to be the airplane that went down tonight, but when it hits that headwind, oftentimes the plane will go up, causing the pilots to try to force the airplane back down. They are trying to land, they're at a low altitude, and they don't have a whole lot of margin of error at this point, and they're under low power situation here. What happens is the airplane gets into the tailwind right there, and when air starts coming toward an airplane from behind it, that's when you get into a terrible situation, because an airplane relies critically on the air passing underneath its wings. And if the velocity of the air passing under that wings falls below a certain threshold, the plane itself loses any type of airworthiness, and it, at that point, starts falling like any object would fall back to Earth. That's essentially what wind shear is. Was that the cause tonight? Of course, we don't know, and we're not trying to say that it was. But again, just to try and educate you, you've been hearing this phenomenon mentioned tonight. We wanted to bring you up to date on that. Now, coming up in a little bit, we'll have some more weather for you, plus a possible hurricane heading for northwest Florida. All of that ahead.
Very hectic one. It sure has. Our Mike Hoza joins us now live from the airport with what you have seen. Mike, what is it?
Well, of course, when a tragedy like this happens, we try to tell you all parts of the story, and people want to hear all parts. And that includes, I guess, the story about people waiting inside the airport terminal for the plane that never got there. Unfortunately, we can't tell you much about that tonight because USAir immediately went into what we reporters call a hunker down or bunker mentality. USAir personnel closed off C concourse shortly after the crash and basically did not tell a lot of people coming to the airport what had happened. It was during this period they apparently rounded up anyone waiting for Flight 1016 and spirited them away.
I don't have any comment at this time. I'm sorry. No comment? No comment.
When the concourse reopened, people knew there was no plane at gate C13. They knew flights were delayed, but they didn't know why.
They told us that there was a storm, and so we just had to circle around.
They said, we can't tell you anything because we don't know anything. And she acted like she had no idea, or they were in the dark about the whole thing.
Did they tell you there was a crash?
No. No. They said the thunderstorm moved off.
Of course, everyone knew there was that thunderstorm, and USAir, in this bunker mentality that we're talking about, basically would not let reporters come down into the concourse. The only people they would let go down into the concourse was those who had tickets. So I have to tell you, we bought a ticket, and I guess the news director is going to have to pay for this one for us to get that story.
I guess you're right, Mike. She's watching, so he knows to go ahead and cough it up. That's one way to get the story, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And, Mike, before you go, we all want everyone to know that you were here in 1974 when the last airplane crashed at Charlotte Douglas Airport. It was an Eastern Airlines jet. Tell us about what you remember about that 22 years ago.
Well, that was Eastern Flight 212. It crashed on the other side of the airport, on the south side. And basically, like this one happened in the evening, that one happened just the opposite. It was in the early morning. And we're looking at some scenes here that show bodies and burning wreckage from that airport, from that air crash. And it also was a DC-9, and it crashed in ground fog, and the official investigation showed that the cause of that crash was pilot error. The co-pilot was flying the plane, and he became disoriented in the fog about where he was, and just basically flew the plane into the ground. That was the phrase that the National Transportation Board used in describing that accident. Here you're seeing just all kinds of scenes. I remember this so very well. I was a young reporter then, and this was certainly the biggest story I had ever covered, and maybe even to this day it's the biggest story. My recollection is that 60 people, maybe a couple of more, I'm not sure, were killed in that crash. The plane exploded, and most of them were killed in the explosion. A few people actually walked away from that crash. One of them was a stewardess. Another was a Navy fireman who looked out and after the plane had hit the ground, and he saw a ring of fire, and he knew you could run through fire, and he did. And then he turned around and the plane exploded, and most of the people were killed in the explosion.
Mike, thank you. Something that you certainly would never forget. Well, the airport was the site of another crash back in 1986. A Piedmont Airlines jet carrying 119 people ran off the end of a runway and came to a stop on some railroad tracks. 34 people on that flight were hurt. Now, most of those injuries were minor. An investigation later showed that the plane was traveling too fast when it landed.
And now we're going to go, a lot of you probably asking, how can I help? What can I do? Can I give blood? Can I go down there to help the people who are injured?
What is going on with that search?
Well, we had the helicopter up for a while with both the light and some infrared to see if there were any stragglers that had perhaps wandered away from the scene. That was unsuccessful, didn't determine anything. Most likely those 5 people are in the wreckage somewhere.
What about the actual crash itself? Tell us again what happened as that pilot came in on his approach and what you know. There had been some talk of perhaps another plane being involved. See if you can clarify that for us.
The pilot was on approach to land on 18 right. He announced his intention to go around and made a turn to the right, which would have been to the west. Did not gain altitude and landed in into some trees and ended up on a house.
So no other plane involved?
As best I know, there was no other plane involved.
What about the black box? Has that been recovered? Is that still there? The black, of course, for folks at home, they should be familiar with that, but in case they're not, that of course tells that's the flight recorder.
We're pretty sure it's still there. We've not actually recovered it yet, but most likely will.
Where do things stand with the investigation?
The NTSB is on the way here. They'll be here shortly, and we'll begin their investigation as soon as they get here.
Will they be working through the night, or will they simply take stock of the scene and then come back in the morning? What's going to be happening overnight here?
We're probably going to throttle down here pretty severely. We'll continue to mark things at the wreckage and continue to seek those 5 people that we haven't accounted for. But they will start in earnest at first light in the morning.
And finally, what about the amount of response here? Can you tell us about how things went responding to an emergency like this?
I think the response is best. We can tell at this point the response went very well. We had 30 or so police cars on the scene very shortly, and was a 5-alarm for the fire department. Lots of firefighters out here.
Were you here 20 years ago when we had the last crash?
I was here. I was not working for the airport.
Okay, I'm trying to see if you had any sense of how this compares to that time back then.
Well, I can't remember that long, but this is a bad crash.
Jerry, thanks a lot. I know you have a lot more work to do. Appreciate your time. Jerry Orr from the airport, and again, as he mentioned, it was a 5-alarm response for the fire department, and one of the battalion chiefs here said that that is the first 5-alarm that he can ever remember. So quite a few units out here doing the best they can to save as many lives as they can. Dave, back to you.
Ed, again, our thanks to you very much. Again, Ed Gallick reporting live tonight for News 36 from the command center. Indeed, a very bad crash. 19 people known dead. That figure could go up if there's any good news to come out of this at all. Not everyone was killed in that crash. 33 people did survive, although let us hasten to say some of them are reported to be severely burned. Now, the crash, rather the DC-9 USAir 1016, again, originated out of Columbia, South Carolina. If it went down shortly before 7 o'clock tonight, if you feel that you might know somebody who might have been on board the plane, I asked you a couple of moments ago to grab a pencil and paper. Here on your screen is a number that you can call, area code 703-418-5100. Again, that number for passenger information, area code 703-418-5100. And if you weren't quite quick enough to grab a pencil and paper, I'll mention that number to you again a little bit later on. Well, our special coverage of the crash of USAir Flight 1016 will continue in just a moment.
For the officers and the emergency workers who are going to need counseling right away.
Yes, I'm sure that'll be happening, yes.
With your experience, how long does it take for something like this to set into the mind of an officer? I mean, you've told me about officers who have lost children, you know, in their arms and that sort of a thing over the years. I mean, is there any set pattern for what the officers and emergency workers' needs are after going through something as traumatic as this?
Well, it's obviously an individual reaction, but basically we try to get to them within 6 to 12 to 48 hours, no more than 48 hours after the incident, to debrief them or at least give them a chance to talk. What you want the person to do is talk out what he or she is feeling and get it out, and also realize they're not going crazy about all the weird feelings they are having about what they've been through.
Dennis Whitaker, thanks so much. Obviously, there's still an awful lot going on here at the scene. We talked a little bit a while ago about the helicopter being up, using some infrared kinds of equipment to search for some of the missing and the injured. So far, we haven't gotten any results on how that search is going. Back to you in the studio.
Hey, Steve, thank you. Whether you're an emergency personnel person who shows up on the scene or if you're someone who saw the crash happen, involved in any way, it is very, very traumatic.
Exactly. And our Mike Matthews earlier this evening was at Carolina's Medical Center and spoke with a victim who was literally driving on Wallace Neal Road when the plane crashed all around her. This is taped earlier. Compelling testimony from this victim who is very thankful to be alive.
Carol, you were driving on Wallace Neal Road when this accident happened, and the plane hit your car.
Well, I don't know, fragments from the plane, and then I got tied up and wrapped up in the wires in the car, and it was just amazing.
Tell me what happened, to the best of your recollection.
Driving down Wallace Neal Road, and all of a sudden I saw just fire, a bolt of fire go across the road, and the car continued through that fire. And then all of a sudden it came to a stop, and all I saw was just fire everywhere all around me, dark smoke and everything.
Did you have any idea what had happened?
Not at first. All I could do at that point was just pray. Just pray.
Who might have been on that plane that originated in Columbia, South Carolina, en route to Charlotte. The number 703-418-5100. One more time, 703-418-5100. We would remind you, too, that News 36, of course, will be following this story throughout the night for additional information and updates as the hours turn into the very early morning hours. So we would ask you to stay with us. And, of course, for a full update on what's happening and what did happen throughout the night. Obviously, not many of you can stay up all night long. Be sure to join News 36 tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock in the morning with Kathy Riley. We thank you very much for watching.
Earlier about his experiences, he told us what he saw.
Debris, landing gear was in the middle of the street, and the main section of the pilot's cabin was to my left. The passenger cabin would be to my right, and in the noise, we kept hearing, another fellow and I kept hearing, help me, help me. And at that moment, we looked to our right and saw this fella crawling out of the bushes, wearing military fatigue, probably 24, 25-year-old fella. And he was burning from the waist down, had a nasty gash in his throat. He was bleeding profusely. So we commenced to turn him over, try to get the flames out. They wouldn't go out. And every time he would turn, he was just in excruciating pain. We finally got the flames out by the trousers actually burning away somewhat. And like I say, he was burning, bleeding from the neck wound, the lacerations from the right side of his face. And I understand he was transported with 80% burns.
No word on that gentleman's condition. Of course, we are praying for all the survivors tonight. We do know that emergency crews will be here overnight. We know that the FAA will be investigating this as well as the NTSB. And I was told by an FAA spokesman just a minute ago that it probably will take months to truly determine the extent of damage and also the cause in this crash.
All right, thank you, Rita, reporting live. Now, a lot of you may say, I might have someone I know or a relative, especially on Flight 1016 originating out of Columbia. USAir has set up this passenger information number for you to call if you have a relative on Flight 1016 out of Columbia on its way to Charlotte. That number is on your screen. It is area code 703-418-5100, 418-5100. Please call if you have a relative, or if you may think you have a relative on board.
Now, Lisa, we've been talking about the weather all evening long, wondering whether the weather had anything to do with it. Our Eric Thomas is in the Weather Center with more. Eric?
Okay, thanks a lot, more. And we're going to look at a radar picture coming up here in just a minute. We'll show you the storm that actually did move over western sections of Mecklenburg County. First of all, let's start off with our forecast for the rest of tonight, and then we'll show you our Doppler radar, and then we'll get to some other pictures for you. Here it is now. Still a couple of heavy thunderstorms are possible. We have one garden variety thunderstorm in our 50-mile range. Low temperature tonight, 70 degrees, and there it is. Now, that's not a particularly strong thunderstorm, but right there.
After 4.5 years, Jim Baker gets out of prison, and Eyewitness News is there. One of the most controversial...
Praise the Lord. I was
in Charlotte this evening. It was nearing Charlotte Douglas Airport when it went down in a residential area near Old Dowd Road. 18 people are confirmed dead at this hour. 33 others have been taken to hospitals in the area for treatment. The plane smashed into trees and sheared off the top of telephone poles that broke into 3 large pieces, the plane it did, before hitting the ground. The rear section of the aircraft slammed into a house. The people who lived in the house were not at home at the time. An FAA official said Flight 1016 was not able to land on initial approach, but FAA officials have not said why.
Update that death toll a little bit. We understand that there are now 19 people who have died in this crash. Want to tell you, though, our coverage of the crash of USAir Flight 1016 will continue throughout the night. At midnight, we'll bring you the latest from the scene, and we'll take you to the hospital where the victims were taken. And then at 7 o'clock in the morning, join us for a special Sunday morning edition of Daybreak. We'll have up-to-date information on the crash and conditions of the 33 people who have been injured.
Only 3 crew members and 11 passengers made it here. Doctors and administrators say more could have been helped if they survived the impact and the terrifying moments that preceded it.
Well, I didn't look out the windows, but I knew there was a storm because the plane was jumping up and down while it was coming to Charlotte.
Now, Thomas and a friend were headed to Philadelphia for the holiday weekend. Thomas is afraid that his friend, who was sitting just several seats away, is now dead. For his part, he's suffering from cuts and burns on his face and arms, and that's his story. Dave?
Of Winsboro, South Carolina. Just 24 hours earlier, her brother Roger says it was a time for celebration. It was Rita's wedding day.
My sister got married to Steve. They's going on their honeymoon.
They were going to go down to the Caribbean on a cruise?
Yeah, they was going to the Caribbean on a cruise on their bad trip.
Hundreds of USAir employees have been assigned to inform and counsel victims' families. However, some of the folks that have been put up here by USAir here at the Adams Mart aren't too happy with their treatment.
You can't talk to anybody. Nobody give you any straight answer or nothing like that.
In fact, these frustrated families and friends of those missing were upset that they were hustled into a conference room and told they would meet someone from USAir. After nearly an hour, no one had shown up.
Nobody's been in there yet. They said we'd have a conference around 10, and we haven't had a conference yet. So we've still been waiting, and we're anxious.
But USAir Chief Seth Schofield defends the airline's response.
I think we've done everything within our power to move as quickly as we can. And while it may not have been to the liking of some, I can assure you we have done as well as we can.
Kathy Riley, News 36 at 6.
Well, at this point, Michael Greenlee and his first officer, James Hayes, are in good condition tonight. They are at Carolina's Medical Center. The rest of the crew is also in good condition tonight. One flight attendant was treated and released. Now, pilot Michael Greenlee joined USAir back in 1985. He has since logged some 2,000 hours, flying hours, on DC-9s. At a news conference this afternoon, the chairman of USAir, Seth Schofield, said that despite the accident and a prior DC-9 crash in Charlotte 20 years ago, he has confidence in the plane.
Oh, it's a wonderful airplane. If you went out and asked the pilots that fly the airplane, they will tell you it is one of the most stable, best performing, reliable airplanes in the fleet. So it has a great confidence level.
Well, now, the plane in question is a favorite among pilots and passengers alike. It is also a mainstay of the USAir fleet. Kurt Lee has more on the McDonnell Douglas DC-9.
DC-9s account for 1 in 5 of USAir's fleet. The airline has a total of 73. With a seating capacity of 103, the DC-9 is a workhorse of the nation's short-haul air business.
Almost 5,000 air hours in DC-9s. The whole flight crew survived, which will aid the crash investigation.
We have not yet talked to the crew. It is very standard because of the trauma of an accident like this to allow the crew some time to pull themselves together. And so that debriefing, if you will come from the NTSB safety board as time allows.
Through the woods, we could just catch a glimpse of the fuselage perched on top of that house. The path the plane scraped through the trees before final impact clearly visible. The investigation team combed the area looking for debris and clues. Airport officials say Charlotte Douglas is equipped with special devices to sense wind shear, violent currents of air around storms, like the one in the area last night. The aviation director believes they were operational.
If there were a wind shear alert, what would happen is the alarm would go off in the tower, and the tower would advise all pilots.